Yellowstone National Park is a beautiful place, but sometimes it can get a bit spooky. As a park ranger, I have seen and experienced a lot over my time there, but one experience in particular still haunts me to this very day. One night, I was patrolling the park when I came across a strange light in the distance that I could not quite identify. At first, I presumed it might be a campfire, judging by the color and how it looked. But as I approached closer, I realized that it was coming from a small adobe house on a side of a cliff. The light was flickering as if it was a candle, but it was much brighter than a candle would be, obviously judging by the distance, so I approached the house carefully, but I couldn't see inside. Anyway, I gave up after some time. But the next day, I went back to that same spot with a colleague to check out this location. But to my surprise, there was no house there, only boulders, sand, and weeds. My colleague and I were both very confused. We couldn't figure out what he had seen the night before. Oh, quick side note. He had also told me that he too had seen the same thing from where he was. Now anyway, years later, I was talking to a fellow ranger who had actually grown up in the area, unlike me, and he had told me about this supposed legend of a witch house that would sometimes show up miraculously in Yellowstone. Now, according to him, the area where I had seen the adobe house was known for being a place where witches gathered, and there was a small adobe house on the cliffside. He had heard stories of people seeing the house lit up at night, and that supposedly dark magic rituals would happen. But it was so small that it was almost impossible to see during the day, or unless you were at the right location. I still don't know what I saw that night, but the experience has stayed with me. And to this day, I always feel a shiver run down my spine when I think about the words witch house in Yellowstone. And as a ranger in Yellowstone, or as a previous ranger, I've also heard many stories and legends from my colleagues and other rangers who have worked in the park for many years. It's a very common thing to swap stories with fellow rangers. In fact, one of the more intriguing and unusual stories I've heard involves large wolf-like creatures that some say roam the backcountry here in Yellowstone. Now, before you get freaked out, according to some other veteran rangers, these creatures are bipedal, standing upright on two legs, and are much more larger and violent than any normal wolf. They are often described as having long, shaggy fur, glowing eyes that seem to illuminate in the darkness itself. Now, some of the stories, if you read them, are downright terrifying, and they suggest that these creatures are not just wolves, but have almost a human-level intelligence. Some suggest they are actually shapeshifters that can take on human form or animal form. Now, over the years, there have been numerous reports of these creatures being spotted in the backcountry and in various campsites, but often in the more remote and isolated areas where humans and tourists rarely venture to. The reports that I've personally seen will usually describe these as being incredibly fast and agile, with a strength and agility that clearly defies any explanation. In fact, some of the stories even suggest that these creatures are actually responsible for attacks on animals and sometimes humans in the park, even missing persons. Although such incidents are few and far between. Remember, these are just theories, and despite these stories, there is little hard evidence to support such existence of a mysterious creature, let alone evidence like pictures and video. Now, some rangers believe that they are simply the result of folklore and legend, and sometimes your fear can actually manifest things. Others believe that they may be real, and they simply remain elusive and unseen. But regardless of their origins, these stories add to the allure and mystique of the fear that many experience at Yellowstone, and who knows of all the secrets it holds within its boundaries. And one of the creepiest encounters I've heard from a fellow retired ranger who worked in Yellowstone actually had a very strange occurrence in the backcountry, closer to Old Faithful, I'm told. The ranger, who had been working at the park for about 20 years at this point, claimed that one summer night, she was on patrol when she came up to a group of tourists huddled together. They were all visibly shaken and pale. Now, she told them that they had seen something in the woods that defied explanation. The ranger was skeptical but curious and ventured into the woods with a flashlight to investigate. Now, as she made her way deeper into the tree line, she suddenly recalls hearing this guttural growling noise that seemed to be coming from all around her. Now, she quickly realized that she was surrounded by a pack of large wolves, but as these beings showed themselves, she quickly realized that these were no ordinary wolves, that these creatures stood on two legs and were twice the size of a regular wolf with glowing eyes and a menacing growl. She tried to back away slowly, but these closed in on her, their growling crescendoing louder and more threatening. As she got ready to draw her weapon, suddenly, these beings almost seemed to just disappear into thin air, or as she described it, evaporate like a thick, wispy mist in front of her. The ranger, shocked and shook, made her way back to the tourist, who reported that they too had seen the exact same creatures. Now, this retired ranger, whose name I won't mention out of respect for her, never forgot about the strange encounter, and had told the story to several of us. Now, she had said that she too had heard similar stories from other rangers over the years, going far back many, many years, but believed that these wolf-like creatures were some sort of supernatural beings that had roamed Yellowstone. Now, despite her credibility and consistency in the story, the National Park Service has, of course, never officially acknowledged the existence of these strange cryptids. But for those of us who have worked in the park or work in national parks, the tales of these supernatural beings in the backcountry of Yellowstone specifically do serve as a reminder of the wild and untamed spirit that still exists in the lands. I've also heard many stories from different sources and different cultures about supernatural creatures and magic. And I have to admit, I'm an atheist, and I don't believe in things like skinwalkers or black magic, but with the tribes and other cultures, I do try to keep an open mind. It's possible that there might be some connection between the Navajo culture and the idea of shape-shifting and skinwalkers. I've actually had a chance to speak to some of the elders and spiritual leaders of a local tribe, and they claim that shapeshifters and magic practitioners are real. In fact, the Dark Ones have the power to not only change people's minds, but curse them, and also change into different animals, including wolves. And there are also stories about how skinwalkers, and I use that definition loosely as just a black magic practitioner who can shapeshift for malicious purposes, they can put curses on people, as I've said. And some of my colleagues, who are much more open-minded than me, have claimed to see strange, large wolf-like creatures, as I've said, in the backcountry area. In any case, it's my job to keep people safe and provide them with information about the park and its history, even if it is a bit spooky at times. I try to encourage people to keep an open mind and respect the local cultures and beliefs, even if they are different from our own. At the time of writing this, I will always try to remind people to be safe and to never go wandering into the backcountry or off trails without proper equipment and knowledge of the area. Thank you so much for letting me share this with you. I hope it finds you well. Our next story comes from Ted, a park ranger who had worked in the Monument Valley National Park in the 1980s. Ted had this to say: "As a park ranger at the Monument Valley National Park in the 1980s, I was privileged to witness the breathtaking beauty of the valley on a almost daily basis. During my time at the park, I was struck by the unique geological formations that dotted the barren landscape, each one a testament to the forces of nature that shaped this magnificent land. One evening, I was making my rounds, and drawn to the eerie silence that descended upon the valley after sunset, I decided to take a walk along the ridgeline that overlooked the valley, enjoying the peacefulness of the night, enjoying every bit of solace I could get. As I strolled, I noticed a strange, flickering light in the distance that almost seemed to be dancing. It seemed to be moving at an odd pace, and I couldn't quite make out what was causing it. I began to investigate and began to make my way towards the source of the light. Now, as I approached, I realized the light was not coming from a singular source, but rather seemed to be emanating from the entire valley. I was shocked to see that the valley below was aglow with an ethereal light, as if it were illuminated from within. I quickly deduced that the source of the light was a phenomenon known as earth lights, an electrical discharge from the ground caused by the interaction of subterranean rock strata. It was a rare and fascinating sight, and I felt fortunate to have witnessed it. I remained at the valley for several hours, studying the earth lights and observing their movements. As the night progressed, the valley returned to its normal dark state, and the earth lights vanished as if they had never been there. To this day, it's one of the most memorable, bizarre nights of my career. The experience only reinforced my belief that the natural world holds many mysteries and wonders that are yet waiting to be discovered, that I personally believe coincide with the supernatural. Now, I can recall a similar experience during that same time frame. It was a clear winter night, and I was on patrol making my rounds in the park. And this is when I heard a strange, almost human-like howling coming from the direction of spires. It was a sound that I had never heard before, even in my younger years of working in and around the park. Curious, I decided to investigate further, and I made my way towards the source of the noise, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead of me. And as I got closer, the howls became more frequent and intense. I was cautious, knowing that the park was home to many flora, fauna, and wildlife species that could potentially be dangerous if approached too closely. Suddenly, I saw a large, shadowy figure moving among the spires. I shone my light on it, and what I saw still haunts me. It was a wolf, but not like any wolf I had ever seen before. It was massive, a coat of fur that glimmered in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed a brilliant ruby red, and its howls were almost human-like. Now, before you write me off, I stood there frozen, watching as this thing grimaced at me almost with a human-like expression. I was too stunned to move and too frightened to continue any investigation I had originally set out to do. I eventually was able to run back to the patrol car, reporting my strange sighting to my superiors. Fortunately, whatever being this was did not follow me, and to this day I still wonder what I saw that night in Monument Valley National Park. What I can say is my superiors quickly shot me down and told me I shouldn't be openly talking about this sort of thing. To be honest with you, I try my best not to talk about it because it was terrifying and it's not something I enjoy thinking back on. And our last story comes from an ex-search and rescue personnel who had worked around and in Yosemite National Park. Yosemite National Park is a rugged and beautiful area, and we've seen all sorts of emergencies, from lost hikers to injured climbers, and we're generally ready for just about anything. But today, I'm sharing with you a bizarre set of stories that I've kept to myself over the years because many people would probably call me crazy if I decided to share them, and you seem like a fitting outlet to share these with. So, here I go. One day, we had received a call about a missing hiker in the park. The hiker was an older gentleman, and he had gone out on a solo hike, despite warnings from fellow park rangers, because at this point the weather was very bad. The conditions were treacherous, to say the least. Heavy rain and strong winds battering the mountains. And unfortunately, he decided to carry on and become a statistic. So we geared up, gathered our team, and headed out. Now, as we searched for this young man, I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was all too familiar. It was like I was reliving that moment from years past, when one of my neighbors had gone missing. Now, we searched high and low, but the rain and wind were making it incredibly difficult. The terrain was rough at best, and it seemed like we were getting nowhere. But then we spotted something. a small, bright orange tent, and as we approached, we saw the missing hiker inside, shivering and wet. We quickly got him out and there into one of our rescue vehicles. On the way back to the park, I couldn't help but think about the similarities between this hiker and somebody who was very close to me. As we pulled in, the man looked at me and said, "Thank you for finding me. I never thought I'd make it out of there alive." I smiled and I could still remember his gruff face and the way he looked at me in the eyes that day. And what he shared with me, personally, terrified me. He explained that he was chased off the trail by, in his words, a tribe of wild, hairy men with primitive weapons. In fact, they had chased him miles and miles, nearly killing him, until he had found solace in a tiny valley where he managed to stay safe despite the rough terrain and weather conditions. Now, to my knowledge, there is no group or posse of wild, hairy men around the Yosemite Valley, but now these kinds of things make me wonder. He seemed very sincere and sounded like he had no real reason to lie. Another story I'd like to share with you was during my time as a search and rescue as well, but this night, what I had saw that night was completely different. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The way it moved, the way it kept up with my truck, it was like nothing I'd ever even imagined. It even caused me to start paying more attention to my surroundings, the obvious signs I began seeing in the forest. A perfect example would be finding uprooted saplings, tree trunks, and roots stuck into the ground upside down, carefully arranged in identical stones and patterns. I had a feeling that I was being watched from time to time and that I was not alone. Now, I personally carried a loaded 9mm pistol anytime I was out in the wilderness, and so far I've been left alone, but you just never know. This isn't technically a story, it's more something that's been ongoing. Now, the very last thing I wanted to share, I guess you could say fast forward a couple of years, and I found myself on a very treacherous search and rescue mission. We had received a distress signal from a group of hikers who had gotten lost. This is all within Yosemite National Park. As we made our way through a very dense patch of forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had experienced this sometime before, like this crazy deja vu. And then it hit me. I began to notice the forest around me and my partners completely change, as if we were in a completely different time period. The vegetation became more dense, the sky grew overcast, but what was most surprising was the sights and smells that surrounded us. There appeared to be a small, almost medieval-style village out in the open, and no sign of modern civilization from just a few moments ago. We clearly saw villagers dressed in traditional clothing from what looked to be around the 1500 to 1600 AD era, and they were in the middle of some kind of celebration. Fortunately, or unfortunately, they did not see us, and I think I'm the one that realized this, but did we step back in time? We tried to make our way back to our starting point, not exactly sure what was going on, and fortunately, we were able to go back the way we came, and it appeared that we had made our way back to, dare I say, our time. But the only thing I could think is that we had somehow went through a portal, or I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, because going back that way the following day, we encountered no such small civilization of people dressed from that time era. And all three of us saw and experienced the exact same thing. All the details corroborated perfectly. I understand that this sounds incredibly science fiction, but there's a reason I don't share this story with many people. It's oftentimes made me contemplate, am I crazy? Am I hallucinating? Did I make this up? And then I always remember that there's three of us who experienced the same thing. From my understanding and personal research, I've only come across several other accounts that were posted publicly of people going through what many describe as time portals or portals in general, where they experience strange phenomenon and different things. So I'm assuming that's what I experienced and saw, but I can't be too sure. As far as the distress signal from the missing group of hikers, they were eventually found about 3 days later. But as far as the strange time portal that all three of us went into, I have nothing to explain that.